Electronic Arts, the gift that keeps on giving even though people ask it to stop. Please stop. Not long ago we made a show about the game studios closed down over the years by Electronic Arts, and due to recent events we have enough material to create the top 7 other game studios that Electronic Arts has killed. Companies that have been sunsetted, which is the corporate term for saying closed down and kicked everybody into the street. And before we get started, I would like to mention one very important detail. The last show was published around the month of May, and in that show I mentioned that BioWare is gonna be dead soon. Lo and behold, BioWare Montreal is dead, which makes the previous show, even though it included a studio that was still functioning back then, completely accurate. Sure, the entirety of BioWare isn't dead, but give it time. And the Respawn, oh boy, is that studio going to be in for some very difficult years. That being said, let's get it started with number 7, Playfish. You may not really know this name that well. I mean, Playfish, what is this even about? What do they make? Well, since the year 2007, they made quite a lot of games for social network, for Facebook basically. They made a bunch of games that were popular enough actually for the company to be bought out completely by Electronic Arts, and not for pennies, not for, $1 million or $2 million. Electronic Arts paid in the year 2009 $400 million for Playfish, and over the course of the next 4 years, they launched a bunch of games based on Electronic Arts IP, again on Facebook and only Facebook. No, wait, they did have 2 of them on iOS, and then they shut down the company because it's Electronic Arts. That's what they do. They couldn't have tried to pivot towards mobile because that's where all the Facebook games pivoted to, so they just flushed all that money down the drain because this is what Electronic Arts does. Now sure, you may say that, hey, it's a studio that made Facebook games, it's not a big loss, but it's still a lot of people that worked a lot on games that tens of millions of people played, and that Electronic Arts mismanaged into oblivion. I mean, just 1 year after closing Playfish, they decided to launch a free-to-play Dungeon Keeper game, which was kind of same thing as all the Facebook games that Playfish used to make, only this one had microtransactions up the wazoo and it was absolutely terrible. So to learn nothing, which is business as usual, and very sad. Number 6, Victory Games. Initially founded as BioWare Victory because there was a time when Electronic Arts was in the kick of calling all their studios BioWare, to the point where BioWare was probably going to be called BioWare or BioWare EA BioWare, because EA Mythic was called EA BioWare Mythic BioWare. There came the idea of making a brand new studio, one headed by John von Caneghem himself, the creator of Might and Magic, the creator of Heroes of Might and Magic, the man that defined a certain type of game, turn-based extravaganza, and his studio would go on to develop the long-awaited comeback of Command & Conquer. Now, I know it seems kind of silly to put a man that has decades of experience in crafting superb RPGs at the head of a studio that was supposed to make an RTS, but stranger things have happened, and stranger things continue to happen. The first game that this studio was supposed to make was going to be Command & Conquer Generals 2. But since Electronic Arts hates Command & Conquer to the point where you kind of have to wonder why did they create this studio in the first place, the project was rejiggled, refluffled, recombobulated into a new free-to-play game simply called Command & Conquer. You know, the reboot thing. Everything's a reboot now. Look, it worked for whatchamacallit, the Tomb Raider game, right? No, it didn't. It's not good. Okay, free-to-play RTS. At least it didn't cost $60 and then was filled with microtransactions. See, they still had good intentions back then, and they were gonna build this on Frostbite 2. I mean, an RTS with the visual fidelity of a Battlefield game. That could have been great. And they cancelled it while it was still in alpha, and then then shut down the studio. And then they continue to pretend that Command and Conquer doesn't exist. No, well, not entirely. We're gonna get to that somewhere down the line. Well, at least John Van Caneghem went on to make his own mobile game company. I created a little title called Creature Quest, which kind of evolved into a pay-to-win situation recently after a couple of updates that let you buy invulnerability to losing score in the dungeon challenge mode, meaning that you're more likely to get the maximum possible reward at the end of the weekly dungeon challenge if you spend a lot of money on 24-hour protections. But that's besides the point. Number 5. EA Black Box. Regardless of what you may say about this studio, considering the last couple of Need for Speed games it made, keep in mind that this is a studio that brought us so much joy in the past. They made Need for Speed Underground, Need for Speed Most Wanted. They made the Skate series. They even made a couple of NHL games. And Electronic Arts, in its fine wisdom, decided to completely screw it up because Need for Speed was on a yearly release schedule. They basically had no time to actually make these games. So the company came up with a bright idea. Split the studio into 2 teams and give each team 2 years to make a game. Not accounting for the fact that you have half the people making a game in twice the time, which is still kind of the same in terms of man hours work thing. So that's why we got Need for Speed Undercover and Need for Speed The Run. And Need for Speed World, though, that was actually made by EA Singapore, and I believe Black Box just handled the localization and probably the day-to-day operations. Need for Speed World, by the way, when it was in the beta stage, it was a fantastic game. Then EA pretty much dropped the rewards you would get for missions and chases and stuff to nothing, and it became a grindy crapfest filled with hackers. It was shut down 2 years ago, in case you're wondering. As for Black Box itself, it was shut down in 2013 after 19 years of existence. 19 years, during which it made some of the most financially successful games imaginable. Because even if Need for Speed Undercover was horrible, it still sold about 10 million copies. It's that kind of series. It just sells because it's Need for Speed. It sells because it sells. It was a perpetual money-generating engine, which Electronic Arts managed to screw up and still does, and forever will, until they really change the management of the entire company. Number 4. DreamWorks Interactive. Now, the name may not sound familiar to you, but this was the company that made Medal of Honor. The company founded by Steven Spielberg that made Medal of Honor. When it was a PlayStation game, I mean. Electronic Arts bought it, renamed it to Electronic Arts Los Angeles, and for a while made Medal of Honor games. Good ones, great ones, the ones people actually remember. And then there were some issues and misunderstandings, and some of the people that were at the head of the company left to create another studio called, what was it? Oh yeah, Infinity Ward, and went on to make the Call of Duty series until there were some misunderstandings and problems with Activision, and those people again left to found Respawn, that was now bought by Electronic Arts. So those guys went full circle. I just hope they got a better deal this time, because initially they did not want to stick with DreamWorks Interactive at Electronic Arts on account of EA just took everything over and didn't really allow for much creativity. Though again, in the beginning, it was okay. The first Medal of Honor games were good. This was still early EA, and not early EA, but early we devour you and you're young EA. So the studio for a while kinda prospered. It even made a 0-hour expansion for Command and Conquer Generals. It made Clive Barker's Undying, and then went on to make Command and Conquer 4, Tiberian Twilight, the one no one liked, and then they went through a name change again and downsized a bunch, and they went back to Medal of Honor, the horrible Medal of Honor reboot games, and I mean dreadful. They make Call of Duty seem like poetry, and the studio kind of died then. Now it's sort of DICE Los Angeles in quotation marks, but it's kind of dead. said, there really isn't much of the studio that made things like The Neverhood or even Clive Barker's Undying left there. It's just some of the people that made Medal of Honor Warfighter now working on content for Battlefront and Battlefield. Just content. It's not even making its own games anymore. Sort of like Criterion right now, which I was gonna put here instead of DreamWorks Interactive, but to wield such power of prophecy and pronounce that studio dead is too much for me to bear. Number 3. EA Phenom Ik. You probably have no clue what EA Phenom Ik was, do you? Well, you've got reason to not know what EA Phenom Ik was, because EA Phenom Ik made Lord of Ultima, one of the many slaps in the face and kicks to the groin that Electronic Arts delivered to the Ultima series in that period of time when Electronic Arts sort of got the idea, you know what, Ultima, that series that had a really deep lore and was very much about philosophy and society and things that we don't understand. You know what that needs? One of those clicker things. Yeah, the kind we bought Playfish to do. Let's make them create that. Though to be fair, before this, they made Battleforge, which was a sort of hybrid between a card game and an RTS. Now, the concept may sound familiar to you. I mean, card game, RTS. Isn't that the same kind of game that the Spellforce series was? Hey, I wonder who made that series. Oh yeah, Phenom Ik. Electronic Arts bought the creators of Spellforce 1 and 2. They made Battleforge at Electronic Arts. They didn't go anywhere. They made them create Lord of Ultima, and then a browser-based insult to the Command & Conquer series called Tiberium Alliance, and then they shut down the studio. So EA Phenom Ik, or Phenom Ik Game Development as it was known since 1997, is no more. Though to be fair, at least EA waited about 7 years before shutting it down. At least that's something. Number 2. Visceral Games. Founded many years ago under the name EA Redwood Shores, or EARS for short, this was a studio that created all sorts of video games. They made Tiger Woods PGA Tour 2000 and a bunch of other ones. And I actually remember that game. I was shocked at how realistic it looked, and I think it used picture sprites or something for the characters. It made a bunch of James Bond games that I don't really remember. It made that Lord of the Rings game that everybody played, Return of the King. It made The Godfather, which honestly is a proper good game. Sure, it's kind of derivative if you've played GTA San Andreas, and it kind of has similar ideas with territory control, but it follows the plot of the movie quite well. It has scenes lifted right out of the movie and redone with 3D graphics. It doesn't have Al Pacino because I don't think he allowed his likeness to be recreated in the game, but it was good. Like, I remember playing it and it was fun enough. And the pigeons in that game were one of the last times I saw sprites in a 3D game, like actual sprites. And then Visceral made Dead Space, a game that is called by many a superb, fantastic horror experience. I've never played the first one, so I can't attest to that, but many people have absolutely loved this game and sing its praises constantly. And then it was renamed Visceral Games, because Visceral is a better marketing name than EARS. And they made Dante's Inferno, which is Devil May Cry made by Americans. And then they made Dead Space 2, which is a dreadful game, but everybody seems to think it's the best game of its generation. It's the Mass Effect 2 effect. And then they made Dead Space 3, which was the last time that Electronic Arts sort of sounded the death of single-player games and said they were gonna put microtransactions everywhere, and it had microtransactions in that single-player game. And then they made an Army of Two game, and I don't think anybody cared. And they made Hardline, which again nobody cared. And Visceral was working at a new Star Wars game, a single-player Star Wars game written by Amy Hennig, who is a fan fantastic writer that previously worked on the Legacy of Kain series, and also on something called Uncharted that probably nobody ever heard of, and they shut it down because everything needs to be filled with loot boxes now. Everything needs to be not good. It just needs to be well marketed, cheap to make, enduringly monetizable, and profitable. So Visceral, years is no more. And number 1 is Phenom Ik Studios. Now, I know you've all said that I forgot about this last time, and I'm gonna say to you that no, I did not forget. I knew this day would come. I knew I would have to make the show again after the release of Battlefront 2. I foresaw the disaster. Okay, I didn't. I just forgot about Phenom Ik back then, but I can pretend that's true. You know, on a kind of, I foretold the shutting down of BioWare Montreal. So let's pretend this was intentional. So, Phenom Ik, creators of Dark Reign 2. Man, I remember seeing the first screenshots of that game. It looked amazing, all 3D and nice and sweet. They made Full Spectrum Warrior. For those that don't remember, it was a game where you were a full spectrum warrior. But most importantly, this is a studio that created Battlefront. Battlefront 1 and 2. The first 1 and 2s, I mean. The ones that everybody loved, that no one could hate, on a kind of, they were good. They weren't trash. They weren't cheap rush jobs made to cash in on a movie tie-in with Disney. They even made Destroy All Humans, which is, I believe, the motto of Electronic Arts before the year 2004 regarding its employees. They made that Mercenary series, which was fun enough, as some people have said, and they made The Saboteur, which wasn't bad. It let you blow up cows, had nudity in it, and Nazis, and an Irish guy punching them. And they also made Lord of the Rings Conquest, which was supposed to be the Battlefront equivalent of Lord of the Rings. But since this was made under Electronic Arts, probably in not a lot of time, I mean, they were acquired in 2008, and in 2009, at the beginning of the year, they had that game out. It wasn't good. So Electronic Arts decided to shut down the studio, and 6 years later, after acquiring an exclusive license for the Star Wars franchise, they made their own Battlefront without the people that actually made the first one, because, you know, they fired them. Marvelous, isn't it? Amazing, stupendous. And it hurts now even more on account of Battlefront 2 is a microtransaction-ridden clusterfunk with a completely pointless single-player campaign that leads nowhere and is apparently really short and dull and horrible, and with a multiplayer mode that's better than the previous installment, I can't say by how much, judging from the soul map they had in the beta, which was absolutely dreadful. Well, I guess that would be it for the top 7 other game studios that Electronic Arts killed. Sure, there's a lot more of them out there. There's Waystone Games, which they created and then shut down because Dawngate proved to not be successful, even though they never launched it. There's the inevitable death of Respawn and the rest of BioWare. Criterion's probably not gonna have a very bright future soon. And judging from the way the Need for Speed is going, Ghost Games is a really pathetic name for a studio. But who knows, maybe in the next decade Electronic Arts will finally turn around. They won't, but there's always hope. Goodbye.